Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is the Eargawd. I'm a producer, an engineer, and a mixer, and here I have in front of me is the song Passages by Lex. I recorded, mixed, and mastered this song a couple of months ago. Lex came to the studio and we recorded the vocals to a 2-track, and then we came in for another session. We brought up all the individual instruments, and then we mixed the song roughly in pretty much that one session, and the song was done. It was actually a relatively easy song to work on. The beat sounded really, really good. Anything that I did processing wise was pretty much just to accentuate the beat, and then everything that I did on Lex's vocals was really to just add a lot more texture and to just make the vocals sound really big. And if you actually notice on my session here, there's only 4 tracks of vocals. You have the intro, you have the lead vocal that goes throughout the verse and the hook. There's a couple of parts where it does split because I do effects slightly differently, and then the very last track of vocals that you see is more of like a voice effect that creates this kind of low, kind of pitched, textured vocal, which sounded really cool. That was something we kind of put together during the recording process, and it ended up working really, really well. So I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of the song just so that way you guys can get an idea of what the song sounds like.
Passenger of the night, through all of these passages, found my life. Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah. I am just a passenger of the night, through all of these passages, found my life.
So that was the chorus of the song. So I'm going to go ahead and play some of the different elements so that way you can kind of hear some of the things of what they sound like by themselves and then how they actually incorporate into the song. So in my sessions, I like to keep them as organized as possible. So starting from the top, I usually start with the 808s or bass. I start with the kick, snare, then I go into the hi-hats, and then I usually go into a lot of the different percussive instruments, and then usually towards the bottom of a lot of the instruments for the music, I start with samples or anything of the main melodic elements that make up the song, and then it goes usually into the little pieces of ear candy that usually randomly comes throughout the song. And then at the very bottom I have the vocals. So I'm going to go ahead and play the drums and the bass for you by themselves and just give you a little idea of what they sound like. So one of the things about this song that Lex had given me notes on while we were mixing it is he wanted that bass line to really stand out and cut through small speakers, and even when you played it in the car, it almost gave you this nice rumbling feel. So I'm going to go ahead and play the bass line by itself, and I'm going to show you some of the plugins that I used to accomplish that. So in my session, it was just a simple Moog EQ, and then I used a Pultec EQ. For the Moog EQ, I just boosted some of the low end, and I gave it a lot of air. So this air gain, anything above 20 kilohertz, I boosted about 9 dB, and then I added about a little over a dB at 30 hertz. If you were to hear it by itself, without these plugins, this is what it would sound like. So for the bass line, it didn't sound like an 808, so I didn't want to try to process it that way. I kind of wanted it to be very warm sounding, but it still cuts through small speakers. So with the Moog EQ, that boost in the air gave it that little extra grit to it for it to cut through small speakers. And then for the Pultec is really good at making things sound round and making things sound big. So when I add this, it adds that really nice low aggressive tone to it. And then we got, what else we got? So for the kick, I didn't use anything special. I just used a Neve Pre by Universal Audio. I just boosted a little bit in the gain so that way it adds a little bit of tone to it. And then I think I boosted some 60 hertz, and I used the trim fader down a little bit so that way it still kept the same level but just changed the tone. And I'll play that for you by itself. And this is what it sounds like without it. It's more of a tone. It's not necessarily doing anything super extraordinary. And then I just ended it with a little bit of lo-fi. It's a basic Avid plugin. It's really good for drums. I use it quite often. All I did was just cut some of the sample size, and I cut down some of the sample rate to kind of get rid of the drum beater sound part of it and kind of make it sound more rounded, especially if it was going to blend in with the bass. Snare, used the same lo-fi plugin. I just boosted a little bit of the distortion just to give it some extra snap to it. When it comes to the main sample that you hear throughout the song, so the pumping that you hear, where it sounds like it's being ducked, so what's actually triggering that is the kick. The reason why is because when you hear the song by itself, and if I were to not have that pumpingness in that sample, what it did, it was kind of clouding the vocal quite often, and then when the bass would come in, it just sounded too muddy. So that little bit of duck kind of gave it some movement and kind of drove the song a little bit more. And for the samples, just did some drastic EQ curving, so I just boosted a lot of the high end, and then I just got rid of some of the lows. This is a really awesome plugin. This is one of my favorite reverb plugins. It just gives it a lot of really nice air, and it just kind of makes it sound really warm too. So it's very subtle. The mix is pretty close to dry, but it definitely added a little bit of texture and space into the song. And this is the compressor that I was using to be sidechained with the kick. So if you notice, it doesn't really match, but if I have the kick drum in there, that's when it triggers it. And then what did I end it with? Yeah, just give it a little bit of a 1176, the bluey stripe, just to give it a little bit more volume. And I did quite a bit of compression as well. One of my favorite parts of the song, you really don't hear, but it's something you just kind of feel throughout the song, is a lot of these vocal samples that were in the beat when we got the track outs. It's very subtle. But it adds just this really nice prettiness to it, and it kind of adds more of an emotion to it, especially when it comes here towards the verse. I just really like the way that sounds. It just sounds really cool. So let's go on to the vocals. Like I said, for the vocals, it's just literally 4 tracks. You have the acapella here for the hook.
Passenger of the night, through all of these passages, found my light. Please don't send those messages, not tonight.
So the vocals just sounds really gritty. It's got a lot of effects kind of bouncing around. It's got some delay. It's got some reverb. And if you notice, I use a lot of plugins, and that wasn't necessarily on purpose. When I pulled up the session, I used a vocal template that had plugins already on the vocal tracks, and that sounded really good just kind of coming in. But I noticed It sounded kind of plain, so I wanted to add some more plugins to add textures, so I used this aux here to add additional processing. But all this stuff here just made it sound really lush. It gave it a lot of texture, gave it a lot of character, and each plugin that you see on here was more so just doing a little bit of something. It wasn't doing the bulk of the work. One of my favorite plugins that I like to use is the Spl Vitalizer Mk2t. I honestly really don't know what this plugin does. All I know is it just makes it sound really crispy. It adds this flatness to it that makes it cut through the beat really nicely, and it adds a stereo spreader as well. And I actually use this on instruments as well. You have the Shep's Parallel Particles. This is really good to just add texture to it, and it's got a really cool GUI.
Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah.
So what I think this plugin did, it just added a lot of beef to it, and it added a lot of fullness to it for it to really cut through the mix. What else do we got? Just the CLA 1176. I use this quite often on vocals. It just has a really nice compression to it, and it sounds really good.
Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah.
And it's hardly doing anything, but I can hear the difference. I noticed as I put some of those plugins before this EQ, it started to add a little bit too much harshness in the mid-range, so I wanted to duck some of that.
Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah. I am just a passenger.
I think it just added a little bit more balance. What else do we got? The LA2A. So this is by UAD. I really love this version of the compressor. It just sounds really clean. It has a nice compression to it. I can't wait to actually get a hardware unit for myself one day. We'll see how that goes.
Of the night, through all of these passages, found my light.
It's not doing too much compression, but I can hear it really gluing it down. And then a little bit of a de-esser.
Found my light. Please don't send those messages, not tonight.
Something super simple. This one is what really takes a lot of the texture into play. It's the EC300. This is probably one of my favorite plugins to use when it comes to just adding delays or adding just a really cool texture. There's this preset that I like to use. It's called These Vox Mean Business. If you go into vocals, it's like the very last preset that's on there. And I'll play what it sounds like when you bypass it.
Found my light. Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah. I am just a passenger.
So if you listen very closely, it's adding a delay, a very quick delay. So on one side you have 64th notes, and then the other side you have 32nd notes. The mix is set to almost dry, but it just adds this really nice texture that gives it like some grit, but also just gives it like an ethereal voice. After that, I just used some Mag EQ, added a little bit of low end, a little bit of 40 hertz, took out some 650, added some 2.5, and then added quite a bit of air from anything above 5K. After that, I used the Universal Audio Precision Channel Strip. This is really cool just because you can change the way the EQ curves are, or you can just simply make it a high shelf, or you can make it into a filter.
Found my light. Please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah. I am just a passenger.
Honestly, I think I could have got away without using this, but it just added a little something to it that's very subtle, but it sounded really good to me. And then the very last thing was adding Decapitator. So with adding the EC300 plugin, it added really cool textures behind the vocal, but I kind of want to add texture on top of the vocal. If I were to have to put this into an analogy, I would say if you're eating hot wings, it's just like adding the extra bit of hot sauce or dipping it into hot sauce, even though it's already been cooked in hot sauce. It just gives that extra little bite to it.
If I'm a lie, please don't send those messages, not tonight. Please don't hit my line, yeah. I think I'll be fine, yeah.
It's very subtle. I just hit that punish button, which adds a lot of texture even before using the drive knob. But adding that little bit, and then what I actually did was use parallel. So instead of making the mix of this plugin all the way wet, I actually made it almost close to dry. So if you notice with a lot of these plugins, it's doing a lot of little things that make up the bigger picture. I probably could have got this sound with a lot less plugins, but when you're working in a session and you're working with an artist, being quick, being fast, and getting to the point is really the key. They're not going to really care what plugin you use or what EQ that you use to take out this specific frequency. All that matters, if it sounds good, it feels good, and it keeps them moving into the session, that's all that matters. And this is one of the things that's top 2 favorite things into the record for me, is this low effect here. Unfreeze this, and I'll just at least show you some of the screenshots. So that's for the reverb, just 33%. A little bit of pre-delay. 4 seconds is quite a bit, especially before going into another aux for additional processing, but it just sounded really good to me. EQ, quite drastic EQ. And this is what actually gives it that textured voice, is a little altar boy. So let me go ahead and solo this out for you so you can hear it.
Please just let me go.
Every time I listen to that part, it literally gives me goosebumps. And then this is what the Autotune looks like. So this hard drive preset that is there sounds really cool. It just added a really cool texture to it.
Please just let me go.
It went from sounding nice and clean to just sounding completely mangled and distorted. And I love it. I'm usually the type of engineer that likes to make things sound clean and pretty, but this session, just dirty is better. And that's pretty much it. This is definitely one of my favorite records that I've done in the past few months, and like I said, this is probably going to be one of my favorite records that I've probably done this year. Just for the simple fact that it was really easy to accomplish. The idea just kept flowing, and anything that I was doing to the song really just kept working. And most engineers would love to have those types of sessions almost all the time, where you kind of know the idea of the song, and anything that you experiment with really just captures the idea, and it gets the job done, and the client is happy with it. When we listen to it in his car, I listen to it on my phone, I listen to it in some of the speakers that I have, and even at the studio, and even on headphones. And everywhere just translated really well. So that was just kind of a really big key turning factor of like, wow, this sounds really good, and I think the fans are going to really love it. And so far, anybody that has approached me about the song that they've listened to it really enjoy it. So I hope anybody that hasn't listened to it, go ahead and check it out. I have the link in my bio, and let me know what you think. So this is the song Passages by Lex, and we'll see you in the next video.
Passenger of the night. Through all of these passages, if I'm alive, please don't send those messages.